This is Mr. Barrett. I'm going to be showing you how to do a formula for a hydrate. My example problem is going to come from number 54 in chapter 3 of the AP Chemistry textbook. The problem tells you you have a hydrate of magnesium sulfate of an unknown proportion. You're going to try and find X in this problem. What they tell you is that you began with this whole compound at 5.061 grams. Let's label it appropriately. We're dealing with magnesium sulfate and of course the hydrate, and then that after heating it for a decent amount of time and making sure that the mass doesn't change after you heat it and heat it and heat it again, you end up with a mass of 2.472 grams. Now, after you've heated a lot, of course, you've lost the water, so you're left with just magnesium sulfate. So the question is, what is the amount of water? When I say amount, I'm of course talking about quantity, how many, not how heavy. So I'm going to subtract these two, and what that's going to tell me is at least the mass of the water that was in my original hydrate. So I'm going to take this number minus that number, and I get 2.589 grams of water. Okay, now I need to figure out the amount of moles of water, because I of course want to figure out the proportion in moles between the two of those, because we always do how many, the quantity, and moles. So I'm going to take the mass and divide it by the molar mass, 18.02 grams per mole. Of course the grams cancel out, the moles goes up top, and you end up with 0.144 moles of H2O. Now, how many moles of the water, or the magnesium sulfate, do we have in proportion to the water? Well, the only way to figure that out is to figure out just the mass of this. Well, we already have that number, and it's right here, so it's 2.472 grams of magnesium sulfate. And of course you're going to have to divide that by the molar mass to get it in proportion for moles to moles. So I'm going to take this, divide it by the molar mass of magnesium sulfate, which I've added up ahead of time, and it's 120.38 grams per mole. Grams cancels out, moles goes up top, end up with 0.021 moles of magnesium sulfate. So this is a lot like an empirical formula problem, only slightly different. So it's similar to an empirical formula problem because you know you have one of these and you're going to have more water than you're going to have magnesium sulfate. This is always going to be 1. So just like an empirical formula problem, you do begin by dividing by the smallest number of the two of these. And when you do that, of course, your magnesium sulfate ends up, of course, being 1. When you get this number, it ends up being 6.85. But unlike an empirical formula problem, where you have these two numbers and you keep multiplying them by a factor so that you can figure out what the ratio is between the two, you have to leave the salt, this part right here, you have to leave the salt as 1, and it's only this number that changes. So since my number is 6.85 for this one, we can assume that's pretty close. It's approximately 7. So the formula for my hydrate in this particular problem is going to be, I'm going to write it down at the bottom, it's going to be magnesium sulfate, MgSO4.7H2O. And that's the answer to your problem. If you have any other questions, let me know.